Hey, everybody. Welcome to the ProVideo Pages podcast and webinar series. For this podcast, I am joined by my friend Nick Koziol. Nick is the CEO of That Sounds Terrific Productions and the host of That Sounds Terrific podcast and the co-host of That Sounds Terrifying. He is also the business engagement manager for the Center of Excellence in Data Science at the University of Rochester. Nick, welcome, finally.
Thank you for having me. And my titles are quite a mouthful.
They are, but it's a really unique combination of things that you're doing. So I look forward to sharing with our audience more of who you are and what you bring to the table. We have talked about some of the things that we wanted to cover in here. And the first one is just tell me, how did you get started with podcasting? Here you are working for a university. Tell me.
It's been an interesting road. It got started during COVID. I had found that I was losing my position. I knew that was coming, and ultimately I did. And I didn't want to work in higher ed anymore, which is funny. I'm like, that's it, I'm out. And so how do you get in front of people during a pandemic and explore what you want to do? I knew I wanted to help people, and nonprofits were something that I had my eye on. And I talked to a buddy, and he's, you need to start a movement. And I didn't really know what he meant by that at first. And what ended up happening was I just said, you know what, I need to interview some of these CEOs. I need to talk to some of these impactors, community impactors. So let me start a podcast. And so that's what I did. It was really starting for more of a selfish reason than I'd like to admit, but it was beneficial mutually for me and the people that I was interviewing.
And I think I've got to think that the best podcasts are really win-win-win situations. Because if you do it, if it's really selfish for you as the host, or if it's totally about the guest, or if it just doesn't work otherwise, and even if it works for an episode, how can you sustain it, right?
Yeah. The only way that kind of works is like when you get a big publishing company or broadcasting company, or you already got a big name and you already have a huge following, then it doesn't matter as much like what the message is. I think it does, but they got a big head start, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because honestly, it's like any marketing, like even email marketing, the goal is to get people to open and consume the message that you're sharing. A celebrity, people will open it, but will they keep opening it if the content isn't good? Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe those diehard fans.
There probably are. So in this spirit of win-win-win, tell me, what do your podcast guests benefit from being on your show?
For That Sounds Terrific in particular, there's more of a benefit. I think you get at the very bare minimum, you get a promo video, you get highlighted in my social media. I share extensively on my own individual account, which gets them out there, gets their messaging out there. And basically the show is trying to share what impactful things people are doing in their community and how others can get involved and support that mission, or kind of start their own mission in the same regard. And it's not always nonprofit. There's businesses and for-profit ventures that I do interview. And sometimes those are really great, terrific conversations because of all the work that they're already doing to impact their community and give back, and showing and sharing with the audience ways that they can do the same. So really the benefit of being a guest is you're getting that message out there, and you're possibly getting some more following and highlighting what you're trying to do.
Yeah, no, thank you. Let's talk about the webinar topic. We just recorded the webinar, and tell me about what you shared in the webinar.
I shared the benefits of podcasting and the journey, a little bit of the journey that I took and why I did it. And that there's an infinite number of reasons that you might get into podcasting. All the way down to, I just want to record something for posterity, and I don't really care about who's listening. It's a way to unpack a lot of ideas and have a lot of great conversations when you're including guests or a co-host, further develop whatever topic you're talking about. So the webinar was designed to tell you how you can get started, what to think about when it comes to your topic, how to plan out and map out what your expectations are for the podcast, and then a couple other things like equipment and platforms and other considerations that someone who's not podcasted at all might not even be considering, including talent. Like, are you a video editor? Can you edit sound? Do you Like just to give you a basic idea of the scope of what you're getting into and where you might need some help.
Yeah, there are so many moving parts, and you had some things in there that I hadn't quite thought of. I don't have a written plan, but I tell you, getting the handout ready for the webinar, I will be creating the structure from what you have for a plan so that somebody
Mhm.
can actually take the time to do that and decide if this is a go or a no-go.
Yeah.
And either one is valid, right?
Yeah, yeah. And something I didn't include in the webinar that I probably should have is I talked a little bit about guest interaction communication. I like the way that you have highlighted and really mapped out how we were going to do the webinar. And you had an interactive document that we used. I use a form, an intake form, essentially, that gets all the
Mhm.
information that I need for post. So when you're done with your guest, you're not going back and saying, "What's your TikTok
Yeah.
again? How do you want to be seen?" Those types of things are already there. You've got your headshot, your branding from your guest, all in one form. And you just pull that into your episode notes and your creative branding content.
So next question, why did you start the That Sounds Terrifying podcast?
That's a funny story. I knew that I wanted to do something a little bit more involved. When I first started, That Sounds Terrific. I think I shared this in the webinar. Like, I literally record it. I cut off the beginning chatter and the ending chatter, and I just pop it in, intro, outro, done. But there's a lot more to video production, podcasting, audio, all that stuff. And I've always been interested in the paranormal, and I've had some
Mhm.
experiences, and I happened to be talking to a group. I do improv at the Comedy the Carlton in Rochester, and we have a group meeting before our practice, and just came out that this other friend of mine talks to people that are deceased. And so I'm
Mhm.
like, a week later, I'm like, after we had these really great conversations that probably scared the other person to death, I circled back with her and I said, "Hey, do you want to co-host a podcast with me on paranormal experiences?" And in a way, this one is designed to help people too. People like a scare. They like to hear ghost stories, but also there are people out there that don't know what to do, that don't know how to reach out to. And it's nice to hear stories about people that are experiencing the same things that you are. And we're starting to have some paranormal investigators on the show, and they're more than willing to go and investigate something that might be happening to you and help you out. So,
Thank you. That
yeah.
also brings up where when you were talking in the webinar about, and we were talking in the chatter
Sure.
prior to recording, which is as your podcast grows in episodes and guests and clout, I guess,
Mhm.
you get to elevate your guests. And so now if you're talking to what paranormal investigators, is that what you call them? But
Yeah.
basically starting off saying, "Hey, I'm going to start this podcast and I want to talk to you." They'd probably be like, "Come back later. Let's talk
Yeah.
later. I want to see what you're doing." But it's a journey, right? And you don't
Sure.
exactly know where it's going, but maybe you've got some goals of who you'd like to have on it in the future.
Yeah, it opens doors in a
Yeah.
variety of different ways. I'd be remiss not to explain that it doesn't really matter how big your audience is,
Mhm.
because I've had situations very early on where I've had a client or a guest on my show and they got a client because they heard the show. And I've also had experiences where people have gotten connection just from the promo or needed an introduction because I shared a social media post on my own personal page and they're like, "Hey, I've been looking for that service, or I was looking to do work with that particular charity. Who do you know? Can I get an intro?" That's an important thing to really hit home. And I don't know if I hit it home hard enough in the webinar. You don't need 10,000 or even 1 million followers. It's helpful in the grand scheme of things of collecting royalties and getting sponsors, but you can get a lot of clients. You can get a lot of great networking connections from just a small group of listeners. And all you need is one right, awesome audience member to connect. Like, you could have 1 million followers and no one reaches out to you, gives you a client. But
Yeah, no, that's got me thinking of about a whole bunch of different things
yeah,
and just too many that I can't even think of the question to ask you with it. I'll probably think of it afterwards, but
yeah. One thing I can give you as a tip too is all this content you're creating now can be broken up into smaller pieces of content.
that's
Um,
exactly why I'm doing the podcast, honestly, because and when you think about it, and I think I'm not sure who it was, maybe it was Mark Hayward or Ben Albert, or maybe it was you who said
Mhm.
when I was talking about starting this, which is you don't have to post it to Spotify or Apple. For me, I'm starting with YouTube because my
Yeah.
goal is not to build a big podcast following. The podcast I'm using to come alongside the webinar, because with the webinar, my vision is to provide non-promotional content in the webinar. But the thing is that I can't get the good promotional content about the guest and their approach to whatever their topic is without doing a podcast and having some back and forth. And
Yeah. No,
yeah,
and this is a great way to share little snippets of knowledge. And with the advent of AI, one of the good things about AI, and I know you use Descript, you can pull out things and even create a completely new, like a blog. All of these
Mhm.
things could be just blog episodes with, oh, here's a link to more on the video. So there's a lot of easy ways to take these big chunks of content and create smaller things that foster engagement.
Yeah. And I think part of it, a big takeaway with what you've said and other guests I've had on this that I've recorded already are the importance of the process. Make sure you know how to do things, what, checklist of all the things. It's like what we have when we go camping with our little camper. We
Yeah.
have a pre-tow checklist that we do. And now it's pretty ingrained in us, but it keeps us from doing something stupid like leaving a window open or
Yeah.
not raising the legs before we try to pull the camper, stupid things like that, or
You know, the
basic things like
checklists, like airline pilots do it,
I think
right?
that was the first checklist, wasn't it?
Probably.
I think it was. I
The,
remember reading that somewhere.
you go through everything, you check by check, even though you know it. And I'm guilty of that. I am a very improv. I like to do things off the cuff, and there are certain things that you shouldn't do off the cuff.
Yeah, I'm an off the cuff type of person too. So I have a question here. What has changed for you since you started your podcast? One, you mentioned, it's open doors, but tell me more about that or, give me some more insights.
It's another thing in my toolbox, right? I don't take this part of it out too often, but if I really want to get in front of somebody and I give them like, hey, you could be on my podcast, that's a great door. Because a lot of what I do in my professional job, it can be suspicious to businesses. In data science, in the Center of Excellence, our mission is to advance the field of data science while affecting positive economic impact to New York State. So if I'm able to get in front of someone and talk to them about being a guest of the podcast and showing how you impact the world, but oh, by the way, this is what I do for my day job, it opens the conversation. They see that I'm not going and trying to get money out of them, which a
Mhm.
lot of colleges, the programs that we do for free. Free in the sense of we're not asking for sponsorship money. We're not asking for donation dollars. That'd be nice, but we're not asking for that. We're asking for your time and then access to your data in some way, shape, or form, which can be considered a very pricey thing. So what it's done for me is given me one more tool to get in to talk to someone. And if it leads to a data science collaboration or research grant, that's great. If it leads to just an episode of That Sounds Terrific, where I get to share the things that they're doing, that's great too. But you'd be surprised. I'd be going into a meeting strictly for my podcast. Even That Sounds Terrifying. It's happened once already. And all of a sudden, they're like, you do data science? I need a data scientist. So,
That
like,
hasn't happened to me.
right?
I need a
But,
data scientist.
right, with you, like, you're
Right.
bringing all this great knowledge to your audience from a variety of different business sources and stuff like that. I guarantee it's going to start happening to you. Hey, you want to be on my podcast? Oh, what do you do for a living? Oh, I need that service. So it's just another way to get the conversation going.
Yeah. And I think, I thought of one of the questions that you had brought up for me, which is, I don't know if you'd call it a halo effect or something, but these days you can self-publish a book.
Mhm.
This is akin to that, but it's in smaller pieces, right? The
Right.
consistency matters. But the thing is, oh, you're an author. Oh, you're a podcaster. It lends a little bit more credibility to who you are.
Mhm.
And I think it gives somebody the chance to show who they are
Mhm.
and how they treat their guests, how the information that they share, all of that plays into building trust and building relationships.
And the great thing about these relationships too is that there are people that I'm connecting to this day back to those episodes. Sometimes when I'm introing somebody, I say, hey, I think you'd really connect with this person, or they have some ideals that you're interested in. Check out my episode on Western New York Raptor or whatever. it may be. And it's there. So people that might also be adverse to starting conversations or a little bit introverted can get the information they need to go, okay, yes, I do want an introduction to Anne because she is a person that I want to see. So it's cool also because I am starting to think about maybe doing a data science podcast for the COE. I've already tested the waters in an upcoming guest who has done some partnerships with the COE. I connect her to some people that I've already interviewed.
Yeah.
So that's always helpful.
That's interesting because that's a podcast for networking and connecting. Some people are just natural connectors, but why wouldn't you create something as you're connecting people? And if you go through that process that you just outlined in the webinar of what is the goal of the podcast, I could totally see that having other benefits for people and students and prospective students and alumni and all of this that you otherwise might not. It could be continuing education as well.
There are podcasts that are like video diaries or audio diaries, right? About a process or about a thing that they're doing. And I'm trying to remember the name of this one musician who basically created a song for there's like a personality test that he was interested in. He created a song for each personality. And he talked about like what the process is and what the personality is and what it means. And then he played a song at the end of the podcast. So he combined like his passion and his trade, music, with something that he was interested in. And I don't think it was his full intention to be having it as a podcast. So like you can do that and it could turn into a podcast. But it's like a video audio record of our conversation. So when you go, what did Nick say about that? Oh, and you can go right back. You don't have to go, hey, Nick, what did you say about? We already have
exactly.
it recorded. Now
I
other
probably
people
wouldn't
are hearing it.
Yeah. And I wouldn't reach out to bother you with that. It's hard to create content and to do it consistently. And I've got to think that when a host taps into who they are, and for me, I think with the webinars, I'll continue to do the podcast so that I can share more great content because I'm meeting so many amazing people and I want to give the knowledge and package it nicely. So not only that, I can give it to my audience, but then my audience can share it with their network. And in that way, my hope is that excitement and interest is going to sustain me for the long run with this. So.
Yeah, it keeps you interested in new topics. It gets you to like even things that I thought I knew everything about. Having someone else come in, it humbles you in a lot of ways because even if you're the biggest expert in the field, there's always something you can learn. Like think about a fresh perspective or a child coming in and just saying what's on their mind without any fear of like repercussions that they don't know any about. You can learn so much from really anybody.
True. And just keep an open mind.
Yeah. And so having different people on, and even if it's something that I've had a couple guests I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I want them on the show. I'm not too sure about that. But then I went and had the interview and I'm like, why was I so afraid of this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I didn't know.
Exactly. So I've got so many questions that I'm not going to be able to get to with you, but a couple, what keeps you coming back to your podcast? What excites you about it that makes that consistency possible?
Yeah, I will say the last couple of months have been really tough. I've started other things. I'm one of those people that have a lot of things up in the air that I'm juggling. I thank you for staying consistent with me and being willing to still have me on your show after all of our little technical difficulties and changes. But I think that's what keeps on having me come back is that I learn so much from the people that I'm bringing on the show. And I know if I stop it, I'm not going to learn those things, not going to be as proactive, gives me purpose. It also makes me have a schedule with other things. And when I was a student in college, I was so much better of a student once I became a resident assistant because all of a sudden I had so much structure, so much things that I had to do in order to make sure that I did all the other things.
Yeah, makes sense.
So keeping myself busy is important, but it's just the benefits of meeting people like you. And we mentioned Ben Albert and a number of other people. I would not have met, I'd say 80% of my active network if it weren't for podcasting.
Wow.
I wouldn't have had this job. I really wouldn't have.
That's almost the mic drop right there. Last question before we get to some of my fun wrap-up questions.
Sure.
But
These have
what
all been
regret?
fun.
And thank you. I hope so. What regrets do you have? Is there anything that, looking hindsight, it's 2020, right?
I think my regret goes further back. Like when I went to college, it was like I wanted to be some sort of performer or some sort of entertainer. And
Hmm.
I really wish that I had stayed in the communications realm or went into that radio. I had friends that were doing radio station, friends that were doing, asking me to be part of their acting in some of their movies that they were producing. And
Hmm.
I wish I'd stuck with that because I think I would have started podcasting when it wasn't super saturated, and it
Hmm.
probably would be doing like radio or podcasting more professionally. So going way back, I wish I had started earlier with us. And I guess the only other regret that I have is I just don't have enough time to do everything that I really want to accomplish because podcasting isn't bringing me in really any money because that's not the point, but I need to probably make it the point so they can justify it a little bit more. But yeah, it's just, I think starting earlier.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. But I think that the underlying or implied message here is it's not too late to start. It's
Mhm.
just that you're not going to get to take advantage of being the one of the first and getting the audience. So you're not going to don't go into podcasting to look to make money
Yeah.
unless you're a celebrity, right? Then you can.
Yeah. It can be a very tough thing to do, especially like with me, it's not really on even in the top 10 of things that I want to do. So I think that is part of the reason I'm not making money.
Mhm.
That is not a driving force. When I go and look at my guest list and who I want to bring on the show, I can bring on whoever I want and I can take chances with some people. Whereas some of the other guest oriented podcasts, they want to have the biggest names and like people that will really, bring in
Influencers.
advertisers.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get there.
Yeah, we had a question when we were chatting prior to this, but I like this. What's the coolest part of what you do when working with a guest? And I don't know if you remember what the response was that we put into my shared document with you.
I
I've
don't
got it up
remember
in
that.
front of me. It was about their passion, and I think that gets
Yeah.
into the learning and feeding
Yeah.
off of that. And is there anything you have to
To
share
add
on
to
that?
that, yeah, the
Yeah.
passion thing, I've worked in helping people find and refocus on their careers. And I'd say passion, especially for me, like I'm that person that I see a job posting and it be an astronaut. And I look at the 10 things you need to do to be an astronaut. And I got one of them maybe. And I'm like, I could be an astronaut. You
Yeah.
totally could do this. Apply for this. I get sick on like the merry-go-round sometimes because of the spinniness and like I'm going to go into space and have to do all that. But I think having those guests and having those people talk about everything they do, they get me so excited that I'm like, yeah, I want to do it too. And the passion that people have for life and for what they're doing is just a great like fuel for what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think for me, it would be living vicariously through them. I can do so much, but I know that I'd have to put in a ton of effort and grow 6 inches and that type of thing. Some of the stuff is not in my control and other
Yeah.
stuff, it would have to be a priority. And
Yeah.
so to get that inside view of what it's like to be somebody, I
Right.
think is pretty cool.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
inspiring to the audience too.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so a question that am asking my guests,
Mhm.
is there a specific piece of technology or an app that you can't live without in your daily life? This could be business or personal.
I guess it's just my phone.
Mhm.
And I think one of the drawbacks to having the phone is the map app, right? I have that thing on no matter where I'm going. I know exactly where it's supposed to go, but there's the security in it now
Yeah.
where maybe there's construction or maybe there's going to be an accident on the way home. And this
Oh,
will
totally.
reroute me. But
Totally.
but I don't pay attention to it either because it'll say rerouting. Do you want to take this route? I'm like, no, I don't want to take that route. That's not the way home. And then I get in 20 minutes of extra traffic because I didn't pay attention to it. So I
That's
think that
great.
is the hindrance. If I had to choose something on my phone, it'd be the
Mhm.
map app and then ignoring it when I should be paying attention to it.
Yeah. We have many different ways to go from our house
Mhm.
and as soon as I get in the car, if I'm going somewhere, even just one town over, and I've
Yeah.
got my son, if my son is with me, I'm like, look up what's the best way because I don't want to get stuck and we have an
Yeah.
appointment, whatever that is, that. Okay, thank you for that. So we have talked about lots in this conversation, but in one or two sentences, what would you hope that our listeners would take away from our conversations today?
I think that they should take a moment, step back, evaluate where they're at and then where they want to be and what are the steps they need to take to get there. What is a passion that you have that you want to achieve and make it towards your end goal? If it's podcasting, that's great, but it could be anything, right? And we don't stop enough
Mm.
to consider, reflect where we've been, and then make a plan for where we want to go.
Thank you. That's wisdom right there. Another question is, what would you consider to be the most important reason or reasons that someone should take the time to watch your webinar?
If they want to get into podcasting, it'll definitely give them some ideas of what to expect. And so I think it's a kind of take a chance on me. I think the biggest thing is that if you're thinking about doing something like podcasting or interviewing, you should check this out. And I'm open to feedback. I'd love to hear your opinion.
Thank you. Yeah. And likewise, if somebody's got any feedback, you can find our contact information and reach out to either of us.
Yeah.
And finally, just as I wrap up with you, is there anything else you want to add that I didn't cover?
That's like my stumper question. That'll be when you're on my show, when you're going to be.
Yeah.
That's the stumper question that I usually warn people about. And then I ask them all the fun questions to maybe get them through it. I think that I would just share that there's a lot of opportunities out there for you to make a positive impact in the world and in the community. And it takes just little baby steps. And again, going back to what those two sentences were before about take the time to reflect. And while you're doing that, understand that you've got some great things that are probably going on in your life and try to figure out why they're going on. And then try to give that forward, push it forward to someone else and make someone's day. If you take the opportunity to just do a little simple thing to make someone's day, you're going to feel better about it. And it's like that bucket effect, right? You fill someone else's bucket and your bucket will be overflowing if you just take the time to do that. And that would be my advice that I need to take more as well. Like sometimes I'm just rushing around too much. So that would be like my little fleeting words of wisdom that I wish I would do myself and that my audience gets from some of the podcast episodes that are really things.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm going to follow up with one. Recently, I was with my sister in New Jersey, and we took the train from our dad's house up to Newark Airport. And I don't know, I saw somebody coming down the stairs with a heavy bag because the escalator wasn't working. And she was trying to get on the train. And if she didn't get that train, she was going to have to be there. I mean, just in my head, I think I just went and I held the door open for her. I had to hold it for about 5 seconds. But she was able to get on the train. And what did that cost me? Nothing. It was just a reaction. And you're awesome. And that was it. And she was gone and she made it onto the train. And it did fill my bucket. And I'm like, wow, maybe I was just aware. Obviously, I was aware. I wasn't just head down dragging my bag. But anyway, that was a situation that I could have not seen it. I could have ignored it intentionally. But
and how often does that happen? Like where you hold that hold that elevator and they act like they didn't hear you. They did. And that just to get all philosophical, but it just takes one action, one simple thing, like you said. And what is that? There's like a website, missed opportunities or something like that, or thank yous to people that did something to the person on the subway that got off and gave me their seat. Thank you. It may never get back to them. But those are the types of little things, even just calling up somebody and saying, hey, I know we haven't talked in months or years, but I just wanted to say that this day that you did this, impacted the rest of my life. That's an amazing feeling. And you were there for me when no one else was, right? Kind of a thing. So
exactly. And you remember those things.
Yeah.
Honestly, I had somebody when Facebook first came out and this guy reached out and you were really nice to me in 4th grade.
Yeah.
And we ended up going through high school together, but we weren't in class in high school. He had very different interests, but he remembered that. And I didn't even remember it, but now I do. And that was 15 years ago or something that he told me
said
that.
Something. Yeah. I had something similar and I'll just say this real quick because I know you're trying to wrap up, but here's a great example that was super impactful to me, and it had to do with an impact on someone else's life. So I had this young lady who was in my freshman seminar course. She became an intern. She became the intern supervisor. She became my TA. She was so involved. And one day I told her, you know what you'd be really good at is being a student justice. So why don't you apply to that program? Do that. It looks great on a resume. And so I happened to be traveling for a fundraising opportunity in Denver. And I looked her up because I knew she was out there. We went and got dinner. And during that time, or maybe it was even a little bit before that, she expressed to me that because I told her to be a student justice, she did it and she met her husband. And if I hadn't done that, she wouldn't have the life that she has right now. And I'm like, I can't take all the credit for that, obviously, but it's those things that she really made my day. It still makes my day, just like you were saying, like
Yeah.
your friend was mentioning you and what being in that class. But those are the types of things that we need to do more as a society, and just take that moment to share how others have impacted your life, and it will make you feel so good and it will come back to you.
Yeah. So I think a takeaway that I'd like to make with our impromptu conclusion here
Yeah.
is think about those things that people have done for you, and maybe reach out to somebody and
Mhm.
just say, hey, remember that? You might not, but that was so impactful for me. Going forward, look for those opportunities to help. Anyway, Nick, we could talk for a long time, and I really appreciate getting this done, first of
Mhm.
all, because I think that marks something off our list. And I look forward to hopefully doing this again and being a guest on your podcast sometime.
I can't wait. It's going to be
Yeah.
terrific.
All right. Yeah, I don't want it to be the terrifying one, but the terrific one.
Yep.
Thank you. And everyone, you can check out in the description below. You can see the link to the webinar. And I hope that you join me for future podcasts. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.